Cairo, the year 1200. The Nile River that had nourished Egypt for thousands of years fails to rise. The fields that once overflowed with wheat and barley are nothing but dust. Livestock collapse in the heat. Families beg in the streets. At first, it is hunger. Then, it is starvation. And then, something darker. In the shadows of despair, people whisper of children vanishing, of corpses dug from their graves, of flesh sold in markets, disguised as meat. These are not legends. These are the words of a physician who saw it all with his own eyes. Tonight, we open the file on Egypt's famine of 1200, a time when the Nile turned silent and Cairo turned to cannibalism. For most of human history, Egypt has been defined by the Nile. Every year, its floods brought back silt that renewed the fields and fed millions. Ancient kings built their power on its rhythm. Scribes tracked its waters, like astronomers tracking the stars, and common farmers measured their lives by its rising and falling. Egypt's greatness, from the pyramids of Giza to the bustling streets of medieval Cairo, was impossible without the river. But around the year 1200 CE, that ancient rhythm broke. For several consecutive years, the Nile floods were disastrously low. Without water, the crops withered. The system that had kept Egypt alive for millennia collapsed in slow motion. What began as hardship soon became one of the worst famines in Egypt's history. Our story is preserved thanks to one extraordinary man, al-Laṭīf al-Baghdādī. Born in Baghdad in 1162, he was a scholar of many disciplines: medicine, philosophy, theology, and natural science. He traveled widely, seeking knowledge wherever it could be found. When he came to Egypt, he was fascinated by both its ancient ruins and its living society. But his stay coincided with catastrophe. In his book, The Book of Instruction and Admonition on Things Seen and Events Recorded in the Land of Egypt, he left behind an eyewitness account. What he described was not simply famine, it was the collapse of social order, the breaking of humanity itself under the weight of hunger. At first, people held hope. A single poor flood was not unusual. Egyptians had faced lean years before. But when the next year brought even less water, anxiety spread. By the third year, desperation was everywhere. Without the Nile's water, wheat, barley, and flax withered. Markets emptied. Food prices skyrocketed to levels ordinary people could not imagine. Bread became a luxury only the wealthy could afford. Farmers abandoned their villages and poured into Cairo, hoping the great city had reserves. But Cairo itself was starving. al-Laṭīf notes how quickly normal life disintegrated. Families sold off possessions. Animals were slaughtered and eaten. When the livestock was gone, people ate weeds and bark. Eventually, there was nothing left. Cairo, once the pride of the Ayyubid dynasty, became a city of the dead. Corpses lay unburied in alleys. People collapsed on the steps of mosques. Parents watched their children wither before their eyes. al-Laṭīf describes scenes that feel apocalyptic. Roads lined with skeletal figures. Houses abandoned as entire families perished. Silence broken only by the cries of the starving. Even the wealthy, who had once lived in luxury, found their gold useless, for there was no food left to buy. The famine lasted for years. Not weeks, not months. Years. The people of Egypt lived on the edge of extinction. And then, the final taboo was broken. At first, al-Laṭīf was skeptical. He heard rumors of cannibalism, of children disappearing, of bodies being stolen from cemeteries. But he was a physician, a man of science, and he investigated. What he discovered horrified him. He writes of children being kidnapped, slaughtered, and sold in baskets as meat. He describes corpses dug up from graves, boiled in pots, and eaten by those who had no other choice. In some cases, vendors disguised human flesh with spices to sell it in Cairo's markets as if it were lamb or goat. This was not hearsay. al-Laṭīf recorded cases where sellers were caught and executed. He interviewed witnesses, spoke with survivors, and confirmed with his own eyes what desperation had driven people to. Cannibalism was no longer a distant rumor. It was a terrible, undeniable reality. One of the most chilling aspects of his account is how cannibalism spread. Once the barrier was broken, it became a part of survival. Parents who had once sworn to protect their children now faced impossible choices. Neighbors who once prayed side by side began to fear one another. The famine revealed how fragile society can be. Laws lost their meaning. Morality gave way to hunger. When faced with death, people abandoned the very principles that bound their communities together. For al-Laṭīf, this was as much a moral lesson as a historical record. He wanted future generations to see what happens when human beings are pushed to their absolute limit. Strangely, in the midst of horror, al-Laṭīf also pursued science. The famine left thousands of corpses exposed, and as a physician, he studied them. He examined bones, measured joints, and dissected remains. He compared his findings to the work of Galen and Hippocrates, correcting errors in the ancient medical texts. His observations advanced the science of anatomy, but his scientific curiosity did not blind him to tragedy. He never forgot that these were not anonymous specimens, but men, women, and children who had once lived, laughed, and prayed before hunger consumed them. The famine's toll is difficult to imagine. Estimates suggest hundreds of thousands perished. Whole villages disappeared. Cairo cemeteries overflowed. al-Laṭīf describes how corpses lay so thick on the streets that burial became impossible. Dogs feasted on human flesh. The smell of death haunted Cairo. This was not simply a natural disaster. It was a breaking of Egypt's spirit. What makes this famine even more haunting is how it echoed Egypt's ancient fears. Thousands of years earlier, inscriptions like Famine Stela had warned of what happens when Nile fails. Pharaoh Djoser, according to legend, faced a 7-year drought. Ancient Egyptians knew that without the river, their civilization would collapse. But in those stories, there was always resolution. The gods restored the flood. The priests made offerings. Life returned. In 1200 CE, there was no miracle, only silence. The river refused to rise, and Egypt sank into darkness. By 1202, the Nile floods finally returned. Slowly, crops began to grow again. Survivors crawled back to life, though forever scarred. Families had been broken, entire generations lost. The whispers of cannibalism lingered long after the famine ended. For Egypt, it was a wound that would not heal. For al-Laṭīf, it was a reminder that civilization is fragile. His writings preserved not only the facts of the famine, but the lessons of it. That hunger can strip away everything: wealth, faith, morality, until nothing is left but survival. Cannibalism is one of humanity's deepest taboos. To commit it is to step outside civilization itself. That the people of Cairo, a city of scholars, merchants, and saints, were driven to such acts shows just how thin the veil of order truly is. al-Laṭīf's account is not simply a medieval horror story. It is a warning that echoes through time. When the systems we depend on collapse, when the river of life runs dry, human beings may become unrecognizable. When hunger rules, nothing is sacred, not the living, not the dead. Egypt's famine of 1200 was not just a tragedy, it was a glimpse of how fragile our humanity truly is. Thank you for watching. Stay curious, stay cautious. Until next time on ReaperFiles.